Welcome to a session really interesting, actually, on auto racing. And you see Mark, he's dressed up as if he's going to be in the NASCAR. We're really fortunate, truly fortunate to have Mark Ramsey here. Mark heads up a company, and the company does large-scale integrated multi-tenant cloud solutions in analytics. They're amazing, and we're really fortunate to have him here. This session is session 10.2, and it's entitled, it's on.
Right there.
Right there. Oh, yeah, there we go. Like that, don't you? Yeah. Big data in action, using data for professional auto racing. So please welcome Mark, and I'll let you go, Mark.
Great, thank you. Well, we're going to have some fun. Thank you very much. We're going to have some fun, and it's about an experience of a few years where we actually created a professional racing team called Big Data in Action. So this isn't a costume. This is actually a racing suit that has been worn in a number of competitions. So we created a team with the goal of really showing and highlighting how to create an integrated collection of kind of best-in-class solutions that would help the strategy for racing. So I don't know, by show of hands, how many folks have seen the Netflix Drive to Survive program? You know, so if you, it's really driven a lot of interest in motorsports in the United States. And so Formula One is sort of the pinnacle of motorsports, and then there's many other people may be familiar with NASCAR, which is like Robert mentioned, or IndyCar. There's a lot of different racing series, and so what I'm going to talk about today is really how, from a professional motorsports, how data is used to improve racing. And what I've found is that it's quite interesting because some of the exact same concepts, every organization should really try to factor those in to how you approach your data and analytics programs, right? So there's a lot of things that can be applied from professional motorsports into our every program that we do within whatever organization. So to really go through this today, I'm going to basically cover these four topics. One is I'm going to talk a little bit about this Big Data in Action racing program, and I have a 3-minute video that hopefully gets us all energized about what it's like to be in a race car and how it all works. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how data is used by race car drivers to improve their competitiveness. And so I think you'll find it, I mean, I'm not going to go down into too much detail, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time about kind of the basics of how data is used. And then I'll kind of summarize the maybe 5 ways that, from a professional racing perspective, organizations use this kind of data to improve their performance. And then I'm going to flip gears and say, now, what are the things that we should all be thinking about as we're developing data and analytics programs within our organizations? What are those things that may help in doing things in a little bit unique way? So that's the objective over the next hour. So first of all, I have a short video, about 3 minutes, that will take us up through this whole Big Data in Action program that I talked about. So this is one of our sponsor kind of videos about, and all of this is what happened this was in 2019 before COVID, but
Great.
The Big Data in Action racing program is really put together to highlight the capabilities of a best-in-class ecosystem of solutions and providers. Building a big data and analytics solution is very difficult and sometimes takes a long time. building a big data and analytics solution that delivers to motorsports is a significant challenge. So each of these components come together in that best-of-class ecosystem to deliver a solution that is production level, at large scale, and reliable. Modac Analytics is a service provider that also has accelerators to make the implementation of big data and analytics solutions happen much faster. Their Nabu technology accesses data from source, moves it into a metadata repository, does data rationalization, all through the integration of other technologies like Tamer, StreamSets, and others. All right, so hopefully, you get a sense that this isn't a costume. This is just really talking about how to do, this big data and action racing program. So a lot of times when people think about racing, they always focus on kind of the thrill of victory, right? Being on the podium, shooting champagne everywhere and all of that. For those that are older enough to remember this, but there used to be the ABC Wide World of Sports, and there was always the thrill of victory and then the agony of defeat. And how many times have we all seen the ski jumper crashing and rolling over? Well, the racing version of the ski jumper is when you retire the car and it looks like this, right? This is not what you want for a variety of reasons, right? It's expensive to do racing to begin with. This makes it even more expensive when you're dealing with having to repair the car and kind of deal with all the repercussions. But a lot of times people focus just on the thrill. There's all of the aspects of racing. And to be honest with you, this is no different than data programs, right? We all want that thrill of victory of delivering business analytics, delivering the value. Sometimes we also have that agony of defeat, that things don't work out. And, in all of those, it's a matter of going back and understanding what worked, what didn't work, what to change in the future. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time taking you through, this is some software that's called Circuit Tools. It's used by racing folks, whether they're professional race car drivers, amateurs. It gives you the ability to compare. Now, in this particular case, you see these two windows, the two videos. In this case, this is the same driver on two different laps that they're comparing. When I was doing this, I was comparing myself to my professional race car driver coach because my aspiration was to keep improving and learning the differences between how I was driving and how the coach was driving. In this case, there's between these two laps, this blue lap over here, you can see the box around here, that's the blue line. Over here it's red. You can see how it compares. There's a 1.24 second difference, which for those that look at racing, tenths of a second make a difference. So 1.2 seconds is like finishing yesterday, or it's like you're way far off. So, and what's interesting about this particular example is the blue lap was actually all the way up to almost 3 seconds faster for the lap time, and then lost all of what they had made up right at the end. So this is that comparison, right? And when we're looking at things, this is a great example of comparing structured data. So what we're seeing here is the speed the car is traveling, and what we're seeing on the second line is the difference from the fast lap to the slower lap. So you can see because it's above this median line, this is losing time, this is gaining time, and then right at the end they lose time. This happens to be speed, and then the unstructured data in this case is the video, right? So that's the combination of structured and unstructured data to kind of help make that decision. If we look here, a lot of times in racing, people always ask, well, how fast do you go, right? Because people a lot of times think that's important, right? And what's more important is not how fast you ultimately go, like, oh, I'm going 185 miles an hour in a straightaway, because in a straightaway, you're going in a straight line. So it's how fast you can carry the speed through the turns that makes the difference. So it's all about speed in the turn. And what I'm talking about is what's characterized as road racing, not NASCAR going in circles or drag racing going in a straight line. So this is like Formula One, like IndyCar. This is road racing where you're stopping, starting, turning. And so you can see that the speed goes up as it's in a straightaway, and then the speed drops when it goes into a turn. You can see here that this blue line, there was a very, very significant benefit because all the way along through here, the blue is much faster. But then right here at the end, this person put on the brakes too early, carried less speed through the very last turn. And on most racetracks, the last turn leads into the straightaway, which if you mess up the last turn, you pay the price for the whole lap, right? So, this is an interesting way to look at a combination of data and to help make a decision about improving. You can also see that this driver in this lap is very close to the edge on this turn and has allowed space here. So it's giving you that other perspective because position of the car means when you can start going back to the gas, right? Which is gas is your friend, brake you use when you have to. So there's that data that kind of is reviewed in batch, right? It's reviewed after you've done laps, you come back, you can review it. Now, some people don't realize that during a race, there's a lot of data that is coming in to the engineers, to the pit, about the car. So in this particular example, this is the software that we were using. This happens to be Circuit of the Americas. If we were doing a live demonstration, they like to call this dancing ants, or marching ants. And this is a little circle for every car that's going around the track. In this particular case, car 55 is the one that is being highlighted in the software. And so you can see where you are compared to every other car that's on the track. But this data is being provided by the race, and they're showing how fast the other cars are doing laps, when they've pitted. So you're getting all of this comparative data in real time, all flooding in to making decisions about the time to manage resources for your particular race car, right? Because the car, you have an engineer that's trying to process all of this data and has to make split-second decisions. And there's a few key resources in racing. One is fuel, because running out of fuel before you get to the end of the race is not a pleasant experience. Tires is extremely important because, and for those of you who have watched like the Netflix Drive to Survive, you always hear the drivers complaining about tires, right? Oh, my tires are going, I don't have traction or whatever. So tires are a resource that are extremely important. The car itself and not overburdening the car is something, and then the driver. The races that we were doing in this series were endurance races. So it was multiple drivers, you had to change in the middle, and so when you changed was important, but each driver had to be in the car. Like on a 2-hour race, each driver has to be in the car for at least 50 minutes of the 2 hours, because they didn't want one driver getting in, drive for 5 minutes, and then the pro driver driving for the rest of the race. So when you get to 4-hour races or 25-hour races, there's a lot more driver changes. All of that is around this strategy, and you're comparing to what every other team is doing, and you're trying to figure out how do you do a better job? How do you work through that? And this is all being done in real time, which means that it requires that processing. So when people talk about real-time data analytics, this is one of the examples where it's truly needed, right? A lot of organizations, they like to talk about real-time. They're really on near real-time, or the frequency isn't quite as much. So let's talk about what makes for a fast lap. And what makes for a fast lap is fast corners, right? So, you know, I'm a logical guy, math guy, whatever. You kind of think that if you're going to go fast around a corner, you try to go as symmetrical as possible, right? You come up, you go a nice common curve through the turn. You know, if you mathematically pick the middle of the corner, that's the apex. And so you start way over here on the left, you come in, you go right to that point, you go out here. That would be the fastest way through, because people think about obviously the fastest way between 2 points is a straight line. If you're going around a turn, you can't do a straight line. So what's the balance, right? And I don't know if folks have watched racing, you might see that when race cars go through the turns, it's almost like they're floating sideways for a bit and then they go straight. So it's a little bit different profile than what this really projects. And it actually is by design, right? So in racing, the brake pedal is not to stop the car. The brake pedal is to move the weight of the car to the front so that you can turn the car. Because tires are, like I mentioned, a critical resource. Tires are really good at stopping. So if you're going in a straight line and you slam on the brake pedal, all the pad of all the tires are on the ground and it's going to stop the car. Tires are good at turning. So if you're going down the road and you make a turn, you know, the car will laterally load on the tires and make the turn. What tires are not good at is asking them to turn and brake at the same time, because that happens. And if any folks have grown up where they've driven in snow, they know what this experience is, right? You turn the wheel and the car keeps going straight, and that's called understeer. Or you turn and the back of the car goes way more than what you had expected. That's called oversteer. It's all related to traction. So with an ideal turn, it's a matter of going straight and braking at the very last moment so that you can get the car slowed down and the front of the car rotated so that you can push the apex much later in the turn. In this example, the apex is actually back here, so I'm turning the car and the car will laterally change direction, and I'm getting the car turned, but it's going sideways. It's not sliding. This is not drifting, right? If you've seen the Drift Tokyo and all that, where the tires are smoking and they're going sideways, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actually laterally loading the tires so that you're right at that balance. It's almost like a ballet between the gas pedal and the brake, where the car is starting to turn and is moving sideways, and then you're back on the gas, and the car will go straight through here, and it gives you the ability to be back on the throttle significantly faster, right? So if I compare that nice balanced turn to a race car turn, this is going to be significantly faster, carrying more speed through the turn and getting back to gas sooner. And if folks have seen that movie, Ford versus Ferrari, and Ken Miles' character is talking to his son and about, oh, there's that perfect lap out there, those kinds of things. That's what they're talking about here, is just how you get that balance. And literally, with a race car driver, where you brake is based on cracks in the concrete or signs or whatever, and you try to just keep delaying the braking to be as close to the turn as you can, but still be able to get the car slowed down and in the right orientation. It is not like our street or how we all learn to drive, where you're easy on the brake and then right at the end you kind of lift a little bit. This is 99% brake pedal and then slowly pull off the brake pedal to let the car kind of, because again, the goal is rotate the car to the front, get the tires weighted, and begin to turn as you're slowly coming off the brake. So that is really about an ideal turn. And it's like, what's the big deal? It can't really make that much difference, right? Well, this is WeatherTech Laguna Seca. This is what the track looks like. There's 11 turns. If you are 1/10 of a second slower than your competitor in every turn, you're over a second behind on every lap. And a second is like, you might as well be next week. So it is down to literally tenths of a second, hundredths of a second. And what makes the difference between a turn and a tenth of a second can be literally you're on the brake 2 meters earlier than your competitor. So again, if you're watching F1 or if you're watching the series, they talk a lot about, the balance of the car and all of those kinds of things and the braking. It is very, very important. And so when I was showing you the comparison, I was showing speed. The other thing that we like to compare is actually braking. So you look at that ideal lap and when exactly is the braking happening, how much pressure on the brake. So literally down to like, I need to put 5 PSI more pressure in the brake and I need to do that 3 meters later. It's that level of granularity. So lap after lap after lap, which of course is why I'm addicted to racing, because I'm a data geek to begin with, and then you start feeding me all of this stuff and it's just like it feeds on itself. But it is something where, after lap after lap after lap, it makes a big difference. So from a racing perspective, these are the kind of the 5 things we talked about, right? It's like leverage the internal data, and that's kind of that example of, comparing lap to lap, and really braking location, corner speed, where the apex is, those types of things. And in this particular case, it's a good, you can't know where you are with the apex with structured data. That's where the video data comes into play. So it's that balance of what knowledge can you gain from different types of data. On the predict and monitor key resources, this is astronomically important in a racing program. Is that, like I mentioned earlier, the resources are tires, fuel, driver. You really have to monitor those and do predictions on when to optimally, balance all of that, right? So when the car comes into a pit stop, do you change the driver? Do you not? How much fuel do you add? Do you change the tires? If so, what kind of tires? All of those decisions are based on really monitoring those key resources and then predicting what the benefit is of the different options. The third one is around expanding the perspective to use external data. And this is something where we, as a racing team, had a bit of an advantage, because we were looking at all kinds of different data sources and trying to figure out, could we use data sources in a different way that would give us a little bit of a competitive advantage. If you're again watching Formula One racing or watching other racing, they now almost all have their own weather prediction models, because knowing they want to understand, is it going to rain? How much is it going to rain? When will it start? When will it stop? Because it has a big impact on all of the decisions that they're making around tires. And that's a unique source. I mean, you wouldn't think that a racing team would care about weather. Well, they care about it, but you don't know that they're actually to the point where they're investing in that type of a technology. But there's always going to be those additional external sources. And within those, it's also important that, from a racing perspective, to look at things that are extremely unique, so that you're doing something that's different than the other racing teams. And then finally, comparing to historical data. In racing, a lot of times the same drivers driving the same cars will be going back to tracks year after year after year. So a lot of the historic data is loaded and is available. So we actually downloaded all of the previous races, all of the previous driving pairings, and tried to understand from that historic data what might be the driving strategies for the other teams, and then how did that impact what our driving strategy would be. So it's really kind of using the historic data in different ways to determine what is the most benefit that you can extract from the data. So that's how we approached it from the racing team perspective. So now let's kind of walk through, I love this picture because it's like pushing office chairs through the office like you're racing, so it's kind of cool. But so if you're gonna now transition from, that's great for racing, but now how is it really relevant for our organizations, right? How do we use this kind of an approach to do something different than what we would normally have considered doing within the organization? And I think the first one is, you got to figure out what your ideal corner is. What are those things that you're trying to do within the business, and how do you analyze that in a very different way? I see a lot of organizations that they look at a particular metric, like a revenue, and they view that and they analyze the heck out of that, but they don't recognize that, just like an ideal turn, there's ways you come into revenue, where you brake, when you turn, all of those aspects. So you're actually taking that one metric and breaking it into 5 or 6 sub-pieces that really give you a much broader perspective of, is there something that you could do leading up to it that has an impact more so than just tracking and monitoring the metric itself, right? So it's, a lot of times we get hung up on very specific kind of metrics or areas of decision, but we forget that there's a lot of stuff leading up to it and there's a lot of stuff that happens after that could be actually more valuable than the actual data point itself. So that's one of the things, is find what those are for your business, because they're going to be different for every organization. And I think the second one is, again, predict and monitor key resources. But I think within a business, racing is pretty simple. It's tires, fuel, it's very different within business. Each business has to figure out what are your key resources. And these could be human resources. It could be, number of data scientists, number of data curators, number of pipelines that are running, amount of data that's been loaded, number of decisions. Whatever those key things are within your organization, it's identify them and then monitor them and do predictions on them. So I think a lot of times people within organizations, they'll focus on predicting business outcomes, but not necessarily predicting the actual resources that they are engaging as part of the process. So it's, again, a little bit different way to think about it, is all of these resources have to come together to ultimately deliver the value of analytic answers. Find out what those are, monitor and predict those. I'm a huge proponent of external data, and I think some of this is because for the last 7 or 8 years, we've been working a lot in the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry is very different than most industries. About 80% of the data that's used to make decisions is external data. It's not actually produced within the pharmaceutical company. It's academic research. It's a lot of things that happen outside of the organization. Because if you think of even the largest pharmaceutical company out there, they're probably doing less than 5% of the research on all of these different topics. So they have to rely on external data. On top of that, 80% of that data is unstructured or semi-structured. So it's even messier, right? So that being said, really within your organization, figure out how to expand and use external data for tactical and strategic decisions. A lot of times companies say, well, I'll get this comparative data externally that'll help me understand from a strategic perspective, which that's great, but there's external data that's available that you can go all the way down to very low-level decisions in the organization. And this is an area where even today, I don't see organizations pushing hard enough on the use of external data. We've got to continue to do better in this area. This, of course, as a sidebar, is also driving why, I don't know, maybe there were a few folks that attended the Dr. Stonebreaker discussion on data mastering, but I'm a huge proponent on what he characterizes after-the-fact mastering, right? I've been doing this a long time, so 20 or 30 years ago, we talked about data models and trying to get our internal data all structured and nice and all of that. Forget about all of that. With 80% of your data coming in externally, you have no control over it. So what you have to do is bring it in and make it look the way you'd like it to look if you had control. But forget about the fact of trying to mandate that up front, because it's failed for 20 years. It's not going to work now. So external data really even drives that process even more. Find unique sources. I'll give you an example. And I was the chief data officer for Samsung Mobile, and I struck a relationship with a bank. And what I wanted from the bank was data about what phone people were using. And you're thinking, why would a bank know that to begin with, right? Well, if you think about it, everybody, I'm sure, today has your mobile device, and most people put your bank app on your mobile device, and they confirm who you are before they let you use your bank account, right? Let's hope. And so that means that when you go out and you buy an iPhone 14 or an iPhone 27, you immediately come home and everybody's excited, and you move all your apps over, you get it working, and you then start using your banking app on your new phone. So they know immediately when you've gotten a new phone. Or if you decide that you want to get not an Apple, but you want to get a Samsung or Pixel or whatever, you load your banking app on. So they would actually have better data on how people were using mobile devices and what device they were using and when they switched and what they were switching from and to than any other source available in the US. But they're a bank. And everybody talks about monetizing their data. Well, for the bank, what I was interested in is just basic demographics, like this zip code, and here's how many people did this and this. And that was of tremendous value to a mobile phone manufacturer. And it didn't violate privacy. I didn't care who they were and all that, but it provided a very unique data source that was extremely actionable. So something like that, I mean, it's kind of thinking about how do you get access to something from another industry or from open data or whatever that is completely unique to what you would normally think about using. And then lastly, it's around figuring out ways to compare data in a different way. And I guess the example I'll use here is from pharmaceutical. There's a lot of data available about clinical trials because every clinical trial that's done in the world gets published. And you can see that, okay, here's all the trials that my company has done, and here's all the trials that another company have done, and what disease area and all of that. And most people look at, okay, how long did it take them and how long does it take us? But where that's interesting to do some comparisons is not the trial pieces, but how long it took from the time they finished the first phase till the time they started the second phase trial, that white space, because that's actionable. That's business driven. That's what caused the delay that it took us when it was successful in phase 1. Why did it take us 8 months before we started phase 2? So it's comparing the data and looking at the data in a different way. And there are those opportunities to really dig in and use the historic data in a very different way. And that's just one example. I mean, there could be a variety of things. I think in racing, we took the historic data and actually built a profile for every single driver and then determined what we could learn from that and their characteristics of driving and how long they normally were in the car, how many accidents they had and those kinds of things. So you really use the data in a different way. So with that, I want to kind of open it up for some questions and discussions. But again, the basis here is that there's a lot of interesting things to think about from how racing leverages analytics to how that can be applied in all of our organizations. So questions? We can yes, sir. Oh, I guess we need I need to.
Mics.
You got to get the mic because there are people
watching.
watching.
A question, what you can do is queue up by a microphone. In this case, I'll hand it. But
So first of all, thank you very much. Second, I saw in your bio that you moved from one industry to another. In which way each transition helped you in the next step? In which ideas did you take from the pharmaceutical industry and brought it into the racing industry and from the telco, etc.?
No, I mean, I think the thing that, and it's interesting because I've had an opportunity to work in nearly every industry over the last 30 plus years. And a lot of times, like when I was interviewing for the chief data officer role for GSK, which was my entry into pharmaceutical, the question came up, well, you don't really know our industry. You don't know our buzzwords. You don't know our terminology. Isn't that going to be a problem? And I said, well, data, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to explain a chemical compound to a scientist. That's not my role. But when it comes to data, the scientists can't explain what we do for a living either, right? So every industry, every group has their lingo and the way they be. But I think you have to come that connection, and certainly it does require learning about the terminology and things, but ultimately everything becomes ones and zeros, right? Data is data, and organizations are really looking at how do we get our ability to access and analyze that data faster, and that is common in every industry. Now, I will tell you that when you have a discussion with an industry, and I'm sure most of us have heard this, is we're different, right? Well, yeah, you've got experience in, 37 industries, but our industry is different, right? And in effect, it's true, right? I mean, the terminology is different. However, what I've learned over the years is that it's kind of like learning a foreign language, right? So I had an opportunity to live in the Czech Republic for 3 years, and I went in going gangbusters that I was going to learn how to speak Czech because I didn't want to be the American that expected everybody to speak English, right? So I did a 1-week Berlitz immersion class, and I did all these things, and I was horrible. I mean, I could basically say my name is such and such. I could ask something. I didn't really understand the answer, but I tried, right? I really tried. And what I found is that people appreciated the fact that you tried, and then they try to help you a little bit, and then ultimately they recognize that they speak better English than I spoke Czech, and so we kind of worked it out, right? I see that it's a similar analogy to when you're going into a new industry, right? We don't want to start immediately doing data speak, and they don't really want to start doing their industry speaks, but if you can kind of have a middle ground. And when I was at GSK, what I did was I formed a center of excellence for data, and I actually brought in folks who were scientists that knew the terminology, but they were also, I always called them scientists with a data problem. So they were passionate about data, but they also really knew the science, and those were the translators, right? Because we had a really excellent team that could build large-scale data platforms. We could do curation, we can harmonize the data, do attribute resolution, all those kinds of things you need to do, but we weren't scientists. And then we had those translators that could really help us interact with the business. And at least what I've found in a number of industries is if you get to those folks that are the passionate ones about data, then they help you through that journey. And I can speak more intelligently about things in life sciences than I ever, my wife sometimes reminds me that I never took a biology class, which is true, but I can talk the talk because it's an immersion, right? It's just like that language experience. You're learning the lingo of the scientists, and they don't expect you to be experts. They just expect you to try to understand the problem. But fundamentally, it's around getting the data to those folks so they can make decisions, and then suddenly they're massively excited, and you kind of just go from there. And I guess one comment I'd also make about the synergy between racing programs or racing and doing data programs. In racing, one of the things that you hear a lot is keep your eyes up, right? Because people sometimes say, how do you go 180 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, whatever? Because their vision is always right off the front of the car, and things really look quick if they're right off the front of the car. And so in racing, you have to raise your eyes and look out and be anticipating the next turn. You're already in the current turn. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. You need your vision. And I think we can learn a lot as we do data programs about raising our vision, right? Keeping our eyes up, looking for the longer term, dealing with what's in front of us, but keeping our vision up. Because I think some people get so focused on, we've got this data quality problem, or we've got this issue, or we've got that issue, and they forget about the bigger picture. And so that raising our vision is really a way to help address that. Yes, sir. Ask you to just step up to the microphone and give it a whirl.
Hi. Great talk. Can you hear me? Is this
It's
on?
worked
Okay.
on. It's good.
So I've been brainstorming during your talk, and I was just wondering, do you ever integrate data on the drivers? So like, I could picture if somebody had, like a poor night's sleep, you can monitor all that with wearables or nutrition or things like that. So I was just curious, do you go to that level, or, just as an example of an external data source?
No, I mean, it's a good question. The short answer is that teams do. I mean, it's tongue in cheek when we talk about the level of racing we were doing, and the goal was to make it affordable. So we weren't allowed to do some things, like we weren't allowed to do real-time telemetry from the car. We weren't allowed to do streaming data, some characteristics from the car. And that was to make it more affordable. If you look at Formula One, which is top of the line, I mean, the drivers are wearing sensors, they're monitoring heart rate, blood pressure, all of those things. It's actually kind of fascinating, and there's thousands of sensors of data that are all streaming from a Formula One car, the driver, the car, all getting loaded into the cloud, and there's teams of people that analyze that data in real time. They have a much bigger budget to do those kinds of things. But yeah, you're dead on. Those become sources. As far as like how much sleep the driver got the night before, and I guess you could monitor the local nightclubs and see entrance and exits or whatever. But I don't think they've gone there. But that's expanding like that is you're right on track. And the more that those kinds of devices become available, the more prevalent they'll be as well. Is really around introducing all of those aspects, because I can tell you fatigue is something, and I've got one video clip of when things went sideways for me, and it was about my tires were shot, we were restarting after an incident, and I was fatigued, and those things all added up to a bad outcome. So very much like projects that we all do in the data area, right? If you don't monitor a lot of those things, and that's why the critical resources are really important. Other questions?
If there's no other questions in the room,
We have some on.
we've got a good deal of questions here online.
Okay.
We're going to get to them now. Let's see here. First question is, do all racers agree to share data?
Well, it's the data that's shared is about the vehicle and the race. So like that's why there's two categories of data. When I was talking about the looking at lap times and all of the low level detail about the car, that data is not shared. So whether it's F1 or our level of racing or anywhere in between, the personal data about the car, the low-level data, is not something that's shared. And you wouldn't want it to be shared, because then that's giving away too much, right? That's kind of a racing version of PII, right? It's like you don't want to share that. What's shared is at the track, every car has a transponder, and it's going around the track, and there's segments around the track, and the performance in each segment, and when the car pits, what driver is in the car. So a lot of the things that you can see externally as a fan get shared with all of the different teams. But that data in itself can be quite valuable. But the low-level data, especially around the braking and all of that, that is not shared between teams. It might be like if again, I'll pick on Formula One, where there's 2 race cars in each team. They may share some of that data between the 2 of them, but within the team, they may. And even then, having somebody like Max Verstappen and his very specific driving characteristics and data compared to Perez and others, they're not really going to share that.
Any other questions in the room before I go to the more questions? All
Yeah,
right, great.
just-
Why don't you walk up to the mic?
Yep, step up to the mic.
Simple question: Verstappen or Hamilton? No, I'm kidding. Not this one.
I have an opinion. We'll talk later.
No, my point is, so all this information feeds the team, right? And one actionable from the team is talk to the driver, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you need to be faster in that specific curve or whatever. But do you believe that in the future, all these things will mix with machine learning and all of this stuff, artificial intelligence, and feed the car and the driver automatically and instantly? What do you think? I mean, it's the same for business, right?
No, I get it.
That's
I get
the
it.
analogy.
Yeah, so I was wondering if someone would bring up this topic, but the CEO of NVIDIA actually has invested significant amount of time and energy and money in autonomous race cars. So electric race cars that are all driven by AI. I mean, I'll share my opinion, which is I would not go to a racetrack and watch robots drive cars. Now, what I might do is if half the cars were AI and half the cars were real drivers, that could be interesting because then it's like man against machine type of thing. But as far as like watching a bunch of robotic cars go around the track, and the thing that's different about racing, I think, the thing that it will be difficult for them to crack is when drivers make a decision, right or wrong, to try to go for a certain opening, and they try it and it works, and then it reinforces that they can get away with that, or it doesn't work and there's bad outcomes. Sometimes that changes their mind, and other times they'll still go for it the next time, right? So I think that decision point that would not be well adapted to an AI type of a model. Now, what you're talking about is kind of hybrid, right? Where you have a driver and then it's assisted by AI. And there's already some of that is coming available now where there's recommendations like if you listen to Formula One and they're on the radio and they say you need to be faster in turn 3, that's sort of interesting. But if they could say, here's the 3 things that you can do to be faster in that turn based on the models that we're looking at, but as far as like, there's other dilemmas about do we allow automatic updates to the car so it's all computer controlled and the car is actually making changes. Now what happens is they have to call the driver makes some adjustments, and that's how they're running. They could eliminate that step and just have computers control to make the car optimal. And again, it's a lot of racing, they've added a lot of technology and then they've taken it away. So like in Formula One, they added anti-lock braking systems and things, and then they took it away because, they still want that raw capability to have, it's really your definition of competition and what you're trying to accomplish there. But AI assisted, I think, is something that, certainly for all of our data programs, it's something that we certainly want to do. One of the areas that I really, with the organizations that we work with, really focus on using AI, machine learning, advanced analytics on the data to prepare it for decisions to be made, right? Too many people focus just on using AI for a business decision, which that's the sizzle, right? You make a decision, it drives benefits and all that. We're underutilizing using AI and machine learning on the curation of the data, the standardization of the data, all of that after the fact, make it look the way you'd like it to look. There's still a lot of runway for most organizations to use machine learning and data analytics on the data to prepare it to be ready to be consumed by either business analysts or by models. And so I think that's an area where, from our business side of the equation, that's an area that companies can really double down on.
And Mark, I'll throw in a comment on that. To your point, if the car auto-corrected, in other words, if we had sent a message to the car, change the ratio coming into the next turn, the driver wouldn't know that and might overcorrect. That's why they use the communication system. And one of the questions, the next question which led to, is they're getting all this data in real time, they're making decisions, are they informing the driver? Now that was kind of the question he asked. Obviously they are, right? There's constant communication?
Yeah, there's constant communication with the driver, but there is not an automatic fix the problem connection, right? For a variety of reasons. You mentioned the one where the driver needs to be the one that's kind of in charge and knowing what's happening. But getting a lot of information is extremely important. But you may hear radio communications where it's, we've checked this and we've checked that. I mean, they're running diagnostics on different parts of the car. They're getting data feeds. They're learning all of that. And they literally have teams of 20 or 30 people, all doing real-time analytics. Normally it's back at their main. So the race is in Abu Dhabi, and they have a team that's sitting in the UK, if it's one of the UK teams or wherever. They're analyzing the data. It's all getting uploaded to the cloud and analyzed. And, all of the people that are doing the analysis are not sitting trackside. There's a limited number of people that are getting the kind of the consolidated data that are really sitting trackside. You know, because there's so much data that's being produced. So, other questions in the room, or do we have another?
I think that was the last of the questions online.
Okay,
we've
so
still got 10
would
minutes.
anyone like to see a bad experience of when things go sideways? You know, this is what everybody watches racing to see anyway, right? So, all right, so this is a race that we were doing at Laguna Seca, which is in Monterey, California. It's well known for the corkscrew, which is an 8-story drop. A couple of turns that drop 8 stories, so a lot of elevation change. And to set the scenario before I show the clip, I was through my drive time, so we were at the end of the drive time, and there was an accident which caused a yellow flag. And a yellow flag gives you an opportunity to do a lot of resets and things. But I had driven on these tires for an hour, so the tires were pretty much shot. I was kind of low on fuel, but our engineer was trying to play the strategy that says, okay, if they restart the race, and if you run 2 laps after the restart, you're going to lose a bunch of positions because your tires are shot, and a lot of other people stopped and got tires, right? And I was P1, so I was leading the race, but everybody else behind me had stopped and got tires. So I'm in the front with bad tires, but I'm light because of low fuel. So our engineer had run all the numbers and said, okay, if you can survive 2 laps after the restart and then come in and pit, we can change drivers, and there will be enough fuel that we'll have a new driver, new tires, and enough fuel to finish the race. Whereas everybody else, at the time of where the yellow came in, they were all going to have to pit again, right? So it's a strategy play. The problem is you have a amateur driver, bad tires, and 30 pros behind you ready to eat your lunch. Because what also happens in these races is that the first set of drivers are normally the amateur level, you know, the people who don't earn a living racing cars, which would be me. And then once they change, they put in the pro drivers, and these are the guys who earn a living racing cars. And so I had all the guys that earn a living racing cars behind me, and bad tires, and we're coming up, we'd just gone through turn 6, and we were coming up to the corkscrew, and I knew that I couldn't hold the position, so I'm to the right, and I knew that I was going to have 1 or 2 cars come by on the left. What happened was there was a Ford, a nice pink Ford that's easy to see, that was passing me on the left. At the same time, there was a McLaren that thought they could shove their way between the Ford and our car, and they basically pushed under the Ford, flipped the car up in the air, and it lands on the front of our car. The passenger rear tire is like right in front of the windscreen of our car. So I'll do this a little bit in slow-mo, and then I'll do it the full speed. And it also, the incident happened, you can see from the speedometer on in there, we were at about 130 miles an hour when this excitement happened. So, yeah, so you can see that's turn 6, and you can see on the thing here, see the little squiggle up there at the top? That's the corkscrew. So just before we get to that little squiggle is when this fun is going to happen. So I'm pointed the car up here, I'm on the right-hand side, and getting to the top of the hill, there you can see, just to the left, you can see this pink Ford, right? Well, then the pink Ford, you can see the McLaren just clipped it. So we're doing 130 miles an hour. The McLaren, because it has if you've ever seen McLaren, they've got like a slanted front like a Lamborghini. It hit the rear tire of the Ford, blew the tire out, and then the car jacks in the air. So here comes the car. So we've all had data projects like this, right? I mean, you're all set, you're all focused, you've got your eye on the prize, and then your CEO changes, or there's a massive reorg or whatever, right? So the thing here is keep the vision down track, right? This is not the worst thing that's going to, I mean, this is exciting, but you'll notice I've got a car that's flying in front of me, and see the throttle, full throttle, and because you're not quite sure I mean, I think we've all seen like different like NASCAR things and all that where cars spin out, and like Tom Cruise was in this one. It's like, oh, you just keep going full because you don't know where the car is going to be. Or somebody used the Wayne Gretzky thing, I want to go where the puck's going to be. Well, I want to go where the car ain't going to be, but you know, you lose some of that control. But so here's the car, and here's the up close and personal as it's driving over the front of our car, and then down and through and around. So that's the slow-mo, but here's I'll just play it at full speed. This is what you get to see coming up the hill, getting ready, car comes up the side, and here we go. Now fortunately for the driver in the Ford, he didn't roll the car, because launching over the front of our car, that is a challenge of, you know, anytime you get into those orientations, bad things can happen. But he landed, and actually he ran another 3 or 4 laps before they retired the car. There was too much undercarriage damage and things. My focus on this was to get back to the pits, right? So it ripped the whole front of our car off. We had to retire the car, so we couldn't continue. But and then the picture that I showed at the agony of defeat at the beginning, that adventure happened at Road America the year before, where, you know, a Porsche hit us right behind the rear wheel and basically spun the car right into a BMW, and then just, you know, bad things happened. But fortunately, you know, racing has become significantly safer in the last 5 to 6 years because of all the head and neck protection and a lot of the things that, and the cars are now very reinforced with carbon fiber. It used to be that there was a balance between how much weight you want to put in and how much protection, because big steel bars and all of that add protection, but it also adds weight. And so with carbon fiber, there's a lot of things that can be done to really protect the driver.
You have one last question if you want to answer it.
Yeah, go for
What is the level of trust for predictive analytics across humans and the race team? Who are the biggest supporters? Who are the most reluctant, and why for both?
I mean, I guess this ties...
3 minutes. That'll be a race.
No, that's fine. I think this question ties into what we've heard in a lot of the sessions, which is implementation of data programs drives cultural change, right? So it doesn't matter if it's the business analyst in our organization or it's a race car driver. They have to trust decision making. They have to accept what is coming in and from the level of data, right? And so, you know, I think, you know, as a driver, again, I'm a data geek, so I'm a little skewed. I'm not necessarily but I think what you find is a lot of race car drivers are data geeks, because the more data that they can absorb, you know, it's all about the fastest lap. It's all about finishing first. The way you finish first is first you finish, and then it's about the efficiency around the laps and all that. So again, I know I've mentioned a lot about F1, but if you do happen to watch F1 live or you watch Drive to Survive, when there's a flag and the cars are sitting there, they literally put a computer monitor in front of the driver, and that driver is reviewing the laps that they just did to try to understand how they can improve or where they're losing time, and they're looking at their comparatives. So it is an extremely data-driven sport. I think the difference between something like auto sports or motorsports and like the NFL or basketball or other sports is those sports, you don't have this display feeding you all this data at all these times, right? So the drivers literally have all kinds of different sensors and things that are feeding back to them in real time that they can understand. It's not the load of data that I was sharing that the engineering team gets, but they know if they're ahead of their time or behind their time or how they're tracking to the others. Literally in the car, you can see who's behind you, how much time behind you. So they're getting all of that data, and it's driving them, so to speak, to really perform. When I was with IBM a number of years ago, this is 25 years ago, the IBM R&D team did a project with the Lakers where it was understanding team composition. So like if the competitors brought together certain team, like certain players, they would have run an analysis to say, what players should we have on the court to be the best competition for the 5 guys that are on the other side. And that was all done ahead of time, and then they were looking at that data, and at the time it was groundbreaking. It was a tablet they would look through, and they would say, okay, if these 4 people are there, this is the best combination. And I think a lot of us have seen things like Moneyball and all of that. So, I mean, data, it's just that racing, it's like so active in it, and it's just part of the culture of the driving. So, listen, I really appreciate taking the time. I know there's a lot of sessions. You missed out on the quantum computing session, so you can watch that on video and see what's going to happen in 10 years. But right now, I appreciate your
We're
you
truly
taking the time.
fortunate to have a true industry thought leader. Mark's been the chief data officer, a major corporation. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
All right, so you're now on lunch.